Okay, Doubts Aloud listeners, welcome back. Today is a unique episode with a subject of personal interest to Ed, but fascinating in its comparisons and bringing into religious thought and religions and the development of religion as well. So before we were all thinking, what could this be? Ed, it's your show today. It's your subject, and we are listeners, both Francis and I.
Okay, thank you. This is quite personal. I grew up with particularly my dad's interest in this island miles off out in the Atlantic from Scotland. And actually, there was even a kind of 3D model of it on the dining room table that he'd made. So it's sort of a bit in my blood, and it made me think I could do a couple of episodes. This one, which is very personal, on this island called St Kilda, which I'll give you a lot more details on. And then there might be another one on the story from Japan that also involves remote islands. So
the link then with your stories and both of these, the link to the subjects that we cover in this podcast for the listeners is how would you sort of leap that
okay
link?
Well, obviously we're going to get on to religion, so it's religion in isolation is a link to the two.
What happens to religion when it's isolated, you mean? That sort of thing.
Yes, that's right. Yep. So let's jump in. St Kilda is actually a little group of islands, and only one of which is inhabited. And if you imagine you start in the home counties or London, you've got to get to Scotland, then you've got to get to the remote-ish west coast of Scotland, a place like Mallaig or something, and there you get a ferry out to the Outer Hebrides, which would take several hours, and there you would still have most of a day's journey to get from there 45 miles out into the Atlantic to this very lonely island group. There's just nothing around it, and then that's it. If you were in the Middle Ages, next thing would be to fall off the edge of the world.
Right.
So it is incredibly remote, and it would only be visited until the 19th century, once a year, by a kind of little party that turned up most years in the nicer months for a week or two.
So you're going to be talking about the history and lots happened on there in the history, but what's the actual current situation of that island in terms of whatever's happening?
Currently, it has a summer party going there from the National Trust of Scotland to help preserve it. It's a World Heritage Site, right. So it has dribbles of visitors, but it's probably one of the least visited World Heritage Sites.
So hard to get to, yeah.
Yes, and actually it's unique in being both a World Heritage Site for culture and for natural qualities.
Right. So
I'm going to start with the natural side, and then we'll get into the culture pretty quickly. So this island, it's about 2 miles across. It has the tallest cliffs in the UK, which are 1,400 feet, which is about 420 meters. So that is astounding. I crawled to the edge and looked over and looked down, and far below me were these seabirds circling.
Wow.
Far below that was the surf.
That must be freakish. When did you go then?
1995. I've only ever been once.
Wow. Bet you'd like to go again.
Of course. Yes.
I would like to go. Actually, it's so remote, isn't it? And yet off the British Isles. So, you know.
Yeah. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah. I went by yacht. We hired a yacht, a group of about 8 of us. And
oh, wow. In 95. How would you get there now?
I think the National Trust for Scotland, if you were a volunteer, you could get a lift there. I think otherwise you'd have to be a private boat of some kind.
Oh, wow. So there's no...
Yeah. It's all a bit hit and miss, because if you were operating which there may be a private sort of visitors thing, You couldn't promise that you could get people there because it depends on the weather so much.
And so high rocks all round, it seems.
Yes, there is a nice anchorage, but it's only safe from 3 sides. So if the wind is going in the wrong direction, you have to just quickly escape before you get into trouble.
What a fascinating place. So it's not a place you can say, right, this summer we're going on holiday there. It's too remote for that.
No, that's right.
Too remote.
We had the intention of going there, but it was no guarantee that we were going to get there. And the weather all worked for us, and we got there, and it was astounding.
Wow. And you were there for how long?
We arrived one morning. I went for a long walk later so it's just getting there so we got up about, I don't know, we were overnight, I think, and then we were up from about 5 o'clock seeing this in the distance and just wowed. And then we spent all day walking about individually and together in pairs and things. I went off on my own just sort of because I just wanted to get all the atmosphere. And then the next day we went along, sail all around the stacks and small islands and things.
Wow.
And then we went on the subsequent day.
So 30th anniversary next year. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Wow. Fascinating.
So what did you make of the photos? I was really keen that you should do a Google image.
Well, I saw that one, but I looked up more as well, and I found it a bit like it's almost like with the mist on some of them. It's like it reminds me of more these sort of fantasy fiction films where people discover a new island with old dinosaurs on or something because it's never been touched before. It just looks remote, high and misty and mysterious. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yes.
I did find one with what looked like a sandy beach in a bay.
Oh.
There is a bay.
Right.
And I don't think it's sandy, it's rocky. And then behind it is the only agriculture possible. There's a little bit of not a land that isn't steep, that they could grow a little bit of barley.
I mean, all the photos look very beautiful, but it was bright sunshine. And I can imagine that when it's overcast.
Oh, rough. Oh, my gosh.
Or,
yes.
or cold, it might not. Well, I suppose it might look lovely in a different way. It wouldn't look terribly tempting to me.
No.
It kind of looks uninhabitable in a way, from some of those angles,
Yeah. So there was a time when there was a massive storm and everyone was deaf for 2 weeks afterwards.
Wow.
It was so, yes, it can be quite bracing.
I've just sent you both a picture. I've shared the photo that I can see with what looks like a sandy beach.
Okay.
If you look at that on WhatsApp.
Yeah. I'm looking now.
Does that look familiar? Does that look?
Oh, I see.
Lovely.
Yeah, that's interesting. This looks like it does look like this particular one looks like like a paradise area, that you'd want to, whereas the shots I saw was more like some bleak island of the lost, where you can't, where civilization has trapped a community that haven't aged or anything like that. It's that sort of feel, whereas this shot looks more like a little paradise you might want to wash up on.
You're right, it does look sandy, but I'm pretty certain
it does.
I've got no memory of any sand.
Wow.
So
it looks inviting, actually, that one, to think, gosh, your ship could pull up there nicely and off you go. But that's probably one side of the island, I gather. Very deceptive.
This is the only bit of inhabitation, really.
That there is.
That's the only bit where there's anything flat enough to have any agriculture. Everything else is sort of sheep, really, wandering about on those steep hillsides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's a fascinating place for anyone to look up.
You've given a good kind of feel for it there. If you could imagine that you were going to the edge of the world and this is the last thing you saw with these sort of like shark's teeth coming out of the ocean in some of the smaller stacks around the islands. It really is. You're right. Something like a.
There's also a rock face that almost looks like a face from a side view that I saw. I mean, how we're pattern-seeking creatures, evolutionary.
Yes. Yeah.
What you see, I saw one rock, and it looked like this sort of sort of figure head, with the eye and the nose, and it's like looking out into the sea, and it's like that would be daunting if you pictured that as in a stormy ship as you come up to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you see an island which has had a green top and steep cliffs all round?
Is this one of the uninhabited islands?
Yes, that's right. They
Yeah,
used to go there every year with a boatload of people and jump off the boat and climb the cliffs, and there were sheep that they kept on the green bit on top.
Wow.
And they kind of whatever it's called, shorn the sheep, and took the wool and that sort of thing, and then came back again, and they were there for a couple of weeks or something every summer. The men of the island.
Oh, right.
So everything was being used. So there were no trees at all. And the island was eventually evacuated in 1930.
Why was it evacuated?
The more and more people were leaving, and it became just a few old families, dominated by just a few old families.
Right.
And so there were only 40-ish people left, and they all evacuated. And actually, it was only in 2017 that the last person who born and had memories of growing up on St Kilda died, age 93. She was called Rachel Johnson.
Oh,
wow.
So she was quite a celebrity for in her old age when she was the only one. So when they evacuated, here's a bit of lightness. The men were given jobs on the mainland, and can you imagine what the job was that they were all given?
I would guess farming. I suppose.
Yeah, I can't really think.
Well, you could tell because I'm chuckling.
Well, you put that.
Yes, they worked for the Forestry Commission. So some had never seen some had never seen a tree in their lives, and got a job with the Forestry Commission.
Wow. Gosh. Can you explain a bit more about the inhabitants then, and when and
yeah, so
why there was and why there isn't, if you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes. We think it was. There's evidence definitely that it was inhabited from near the Neolithic times. So that's well more than 4,000 years ago. The end of Neolithic was 4,000 years ago. So it was well more than that. There's good evidence of it being inhabited. Yeah. It's been inhabited continuously. So that Rachel Johnson was the and what's the opposite of ancestor of the
descendant.
People who were living there in the Bronze Age.
Yeah.
So that's well before Jesus.
Amazing.
So presumably the way they lived was very almost like back then hominid style on the island in terms of what you could get. You can't farm or anything.
Yes. So Neolithic times started with just agriculture. Before Neolithic, there was no agriculture at all.
Yes, but then also I'm presuming on the island there couldn't be either, generally speaking.
Yes, agriculture is really difficult because there's so little land for it.
Exactly, just that one little bay area. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So typically the population was between 100 and 200.
Right.
And it was 40 when they had to be evacuated and couldn't keep going. But I don't know how often you imagine it with the Black Death and what it would have been like for about a third of everybody to die in one summer. Well, this happened to them several times when the disease came in from outside, or there was a boating disaster.
Well, they would have had no immunity, would they? When people came carrying diseases, the population presumably
a result of isolation again. Yeah.
just before we go on to too much on people, it is because it's a remote island. It has an interesting aspect of evolution. So biologists like that. In this case, there was a kind of wren that was much larger than normal, and the mouse was also about double the normal size. Um, uh, and it is interesting because it was only introduced by the Vikings, I think, and so even in that recent evolutionary time, it had managed to double its size.
Wow.
And this relates to my overall theme of religion in isolation, because you've been picking up on this, haven't you, about evolution in religious beliefs and evolution in the normal way of talking about it have parallels. They're almost
Yes, I mean,
analogous.
yes, I suppose religion has to, if it's to survive, it has to react to outside influences. And I suppose if it's very limited in terms of outside influences, it's going to develop along a line of its own, which is going to be perhaps more specialized to the particular environment in which it's confined.
Yeah, I think so. So if you imagine you picked up this island and plonked it in Scotland,
Mm,
the large mice would start breeding with the surrounding population,
mm.
and fairly quickly the mice on that bit of land area would be back to normal.
Mm.
Yes.
So, but because it's isolated, there is a different environment, and I think the mice presumably have fewer predators, so they can become a bit big and lazy and fat. I think that's what's going on, but I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so don't quote me on this.
I think evolution. I think it's adaptation to the environment, and it's related to the geography and how that works, isn't it? Geographical evolution or whatever, as well as biological, all interact together. So it's kind of understandable. Yeah.
Obviously, by our standards, it was an extremely harsh place to live, and but actually, in the context of the Hebrides, it was a much nicer place to live. It's quite difficult to get your head around this. So they had all these seabirds and seabird eggs to eat, which was, utter luxury compared to some other people. So if you want really, really harshness, you need to think about North Rona, where there was nothing except a little bit of agriculture. They couldn't do fishing because there was no way of launching a boat in a protected place. There were no cliffs. It was just a fairly low-lying lump of land. So there were no seabirds to harvest or anything. So it was just foul. There was a much smaller population. They lived in little hovels, had no furniture. They didn't sleep on even hay. They slept on ash.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so that's what it was like, and the population died out because somehow some rats got onto the island. They ate everything, and before anyone they could get help, they were all dead. That happened in
Wow.
1685.
It's interesting, actually. They say I've heard and I've read that if something happened to the world apocalyptically, it'd be the rats that went out and I don't know if you've heard that sort of thing before. That rats, and that's an example, a little example of a mini version of rats, eating everything, or at least, people died. Lots of people died, didn't there? Was it a third then?
A third was the Black Death. That's what I mentioned.
Oh, the third was the Black Death on there. Okay.
Yeah.
And then this was more.
There were Black Death style disasters several times in the known history of St Kilda. One of them was at least one of them was a boating disaster. So
that brings with it,
all the men on the island were off on the boat, and they all died in one event. well, not all the men, but the vast majority. And then there's others, as we talked about, with an incoming disease that they didn't have immunity to.
It sounds a bit like a prison, but it also sounds a bit like a little, at its best points, a little paradisical.
Yes, yeah. A visitor used the word utopia about them.
Right, there we go. So I can see how you can have two little interpretations of it. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so what do you think these seabirds tasted like?
I would say a fish. That's going to be my guess. Not chicken. They won't. They will go against that whole thing where everything tastes of chicken.
Chicken.
I think
I'll
they
go
would
for
have
chicken.
tasted very, very fishy. That's what I think.
Mushrooms and chicken mixed up.
Okay, you've done well. You've got 2 out of the 3. My dad summed it up as a taste of chicken, fish, and sump oil.
Sump oil.
Oh, nice.
Yes, it really, yeah, it is foul. But like Stilton or something, if you grew up with it, you find it.
I like Stilton. Stilton's
yeah,
nice.
but I think people who hadn't had any Stilton in their lives wouldn't like it. Or fermented bean curd you get in China. Locals love it, and people who are not used to it think it's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's keep moving. So it was highly. Oh no, that's something I do want to mention. It was actually a safe place to live because the Atlantic sort of kept them safe. There may be some pirates might have come along and nicked some of their food or something, but it wasn't like, can you imagine the massacre of Glencoe and that sort of thing? This was a time of horrible violence, and they were protected from it by the ocean. So they did have a lot going for them, compared to the wider society. Now the owners, it was highly feudal, and the owner was called MacLeod of MacLeod.
Right.
I don't know if you like
MacLeod and MacLeod.
Yeah, it sounds a great name.
Yeah.
And St Kilda was one of his rich possessions because of all the feathers, the bird oil, and the wool that paying the rent to him.
Right.
And so the deal was normally with these feudal arrangements is that you get protection in kind of, and you provide fidelity, feudalism, whatever feudal people serve to their master, and paying rent. But what do you think of the things that the St Kildas needed? Obviously, they needed a boat because there was no trees. But there was one other thing that was really important to them that the feudal masters provided for them. MacLeod of MacLeod provided, and you'll never guess what it is, but I'll give you a try.
Well, I have read your notes on this, so I'm going to make a guess. I'm going to make a guess that it was tobacco.
Is Andrew going to guess?
Well, I was going to say wives.
No, they were fine
to keep the population going or something. Oh, they're fine on that one, right? Okay.
There was a wife story on North Rona where this poor man attended the wedding of of his sweetheart who was marrying someone else. And there was no one else in the island.
One else left. Okay.
So he begged the minister to come back next year with a wife for him from Harris. From the big,
just like arranged like that, no meeting.
I don't care, just a woman.
Just get a woman. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, the answer is salt. Would you believe?
Oh, why could they not get salt from the sea?
Because you couldn't evaporate it quickly enough, I guess. In that all the rain.
Interesting. So they're surrounded by salt, but they can't get salt.
Yeah. So that's why it's so surprising. Anyway. Here's a more interesting quiz to get you going. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and I'm inviting. You don't know the answers, and I'm inviting the people listening in to try and answer it for themselves, so they get into the mindset of all of this. I think we know the answers from these early visitors, who one in particular who gives a lot of information isn't called MacLeod and MacLeod. He's called Martin, and he visited in 1697.
Right.
Okay, so question one: were the islanders happy with the laird? And the laird is MacLeod and MacLeod. Do you want to answer now, or just think about it and then
just think about it?
Oh.
Yeah, just go through them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
2, did the islanders wish that they could leave? 3, what was their relationship with the rent collector? And he's called the taxman, not T-A-X man, but T-A-C-K. So he's not just the rent collector. He has other duties, like providing, boats, making sure their needs are met, and that sort of thing. And he visited every year, and that's how this Martin came. In fact, all the visitors who write about it come with the taxman's kind of visiting party, where they have to row out for a whole day to get there. Okay, so what was their relationship like with this rent collector man who came every year? How did the money fit into all of this? And was it even money a thing? And then that's 4. 5, did the islanders get a fair price for their produce in comparison to what was paid for, for their supplies? So was it a fair deal? Them giving their rent to the taxman and them being given things like salt and other things they needed.
Okay.
So
we're going to go back through them.
Yeah, go back through one.
Give our best guesses.
Think about that.
Go on, you go for
now,
one then, Francis.
Were the islanders happy? So maybe take it in turns to speak first.
Yeah.
Okay, so question 1, were the islanders happy with the laird?
Yes.
I think yes. I'm going to say yes, that they quite liked him, because why wouldn't they like him? He wasn't actually nasty, and they had nothing much else to compare him with. So he gave them what they wanted, and I think probably they were okay with him.
That depends. I would probably answer that, except it depends on how it started. I mean, if people were on the island already, and then suddenly this guy comes along and says, I own it and I want money and stuff like that, that would be, you would have resentment if that was how it started, or because it would normally be that I have this place, you come and live here and pay rent. But it seems to me that communities were already there for years.
Yeah.
And so,
I think it was in Viking times that this feudal system was established.
And so there was almost like someone coming along and saying, right now, you owe me money. And even though you're there, so
sort of thing. But it was so well, people have forgotten that. There was some
okay,
what are they called? Tall stories about it all.
Yeah.
But yeah. So you're basically agreeing with Francis.
Yes, unless there was this origins upset. Yeah.
And you're both very right.
Right.
They were really happy. They had a lot of love and respect for MacLeod and MacLeod. Right the way through. Did they wish they could leave? Question 2.
Again, mixed, because I think that in some ways I would have thought some people would have just had a dream to, I wish I could get off of this, and the others would probably think they knew nothing else and liked it, or knew nothing else and didn't like it, but didn't think of leaving. It could be a multitude of responses.
Great.
Francis?
I think they were happy there. I think they didn't want to leave. I think they loved their island way of life.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So you're both really onto it. So taking France's answer first, yes, absolutely. They didn't wish to leave, and they and as in where outside influence got stronger and they knew more, that was when people started to want to leave.
Right. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So it's lack of knowledge.
So you both got it right.
Yeah.
3, what was the relationship like with the rent collector, this tax man?
Right. Okay. I suspect the relationship was a bit more fraught, particularly because they could probably blame him for any shortfalls. So it's a bit like the king is never to blame. The king is good, but it's his ministers that are all sort of difficult and corrupt. So I suspect it was a bit like that.
Okay.
Where things weren't quite going where they weren't quite getting what they wanted out of the relationship, rather than blaming MacLeod of that ilk, I think is the way sometimes described.
Yeah.
They had the tax man in front of them, and so they blamed him. That's my guess.
And they probably didn't have much of a voice, because that Martin guy would have had a lot of power to do what he wanted almost.
No, Martin is just happened to be a visitor.
He tagged along with the tax man.
He tags along with it. Martin. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right. He came with.
So he's one of the few voices. We've got so few sources of information, because obviously there's no written records or anything. It's just these reports of people who visited, and they were all people who visited with the summer party.
Right.
On occasion. Okay. I've actually got you this time. It's the relationship was excellent with the taxman.
Right.
He listened to them. He helped meet their needs as best he could, and it was a very supportive feeling of relationship.
Excellent. Oh, good. Good. Good for the taxman.
Yes. Yeah. And which these aren't individuals. This is over.
No. I mean,
centuries.
yes. Okay. No.
Yeah. Money. How did that fit in?
Well, yeah, because I see no reason how money system would have worked on the island in itself. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm going to say it was a barter economy, and that they didn't use money.
Yeah. So that's right.
So both of it, yeah.
No money at all until the 19th century.
Just trade.
Tourists started coming. There was this big steamship, which was full of maybe about 40 tourists that did a regular trip from Glasgow to the Hebrides, and they called in on for one day on St Kilda, if weather permitting. This sort of selling trinkets and things like that was set up, and then so money came into it more and more. You're right that tobacco was a big thing they were trying to buy off tourists as well, but it was money based rather than barter based through the late 19th century. The fifth question was it like a fair exchange?
Well, I'm going to change my answer from what it would originally have been in the light of all the
how positive
discussions.
things
are. Yep, that's fine. That's sort of why we went through the five first. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say.
Give me your edited version, your new version.
Oh, that's it. I'm going to say it was fair, because I mean, I was say, oh no, they were captive. They were a captive market, therefore they would have been exploited. But because everything seems to be
exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was in the vein of obviously humans exploit this sort of situation.
Yeah.
Seeing as the two of the others were actually the opposite to what you would expect, possibly, I think that they probably did get a very fair price.
Okay, I've messed with you. No, they didn't get a fair deal.
No.
Sod's law.
So, in generally, they didn't get a fair deal, but occasionally, with economic circumstances and things, the laird had to subsidize them massively to keep the thing going. But once it was going and doing well, he got much more of than a fair share for his
wouldn't all of this have to be taken lightly to a degree, because we're only dealing with eyewitness testimony, of which we've already talked about isn't necessarily that reliable in many cases.
I don't know. I mean,
although lots of people like to say, "Is it eyewitness testimony?" We've talked about this. Yeah. So these are stories that are built back, or sorry, not stories so much, but these are what people have said when they've come back off the island, I presume, and then written down. later?
Well, this is if you're into it, this is quite a famous island,
Right.
and historians have dug over it as best they can.
Right.
You're right;
Okay.
they don't have a
Worked.
whole lot to go on, but
Yeah.
these are the
These are the best you can do, as historians
that's right.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's going on? Standing back a bit is the islanders just wanted to survive and keep the community going. It just didn't bother them at all if they were being exploited. It just didn't matter. What mattered was that the community could keep going and their needs continued to be met. So that sort of humans adapting to their environment, I guess. Okay, I've got another set of questions as we get more into the sort of social life on the island. So how was the leadership within the island community organised? So that the taxman was only there for a couple of weeks, maybe every June or something. The rest of the year, they're completely on their own. So is it like one man was the leader
I would suggest
of the
a
island?
council.
Or council or a woman?
Yeah.
So shall I do the same thing again and get down on the list?
Yeah.
Was a leader appointed by MacLeod and MacLeod, or was it voted in within the community, or was it hereditary in the community that this particular person, whatever?
Okay.
How were day-to-day decisions made? So they could decide to collect eggs all day, or they could go off fishing all day, or tend sheep. How were those decisions made of actually day-to-day stuff? What kind of things were held in common, and what were owned by individuals? So obviously the boat would be owned in common, but where was it? And then maybe your kitchen knife is owned by an individual, but where's the sort of division between those two? How much distribution of food? How was it organized? So they had spent a whole day harvesting the cliffs for young seabirds to salt down and keep for the winter. How was that all distributed among the families?
Right.
And then how about male, female gender roles and things like that? How were they? How much were they different? And was there equity between men and women?
Okay.
So that's 6 questions.
Yeah.
Andrew, I think you're first this time, and you were keen to answer.
I was going to
how
suggest,
was leadership within the islands organised?
I was going to suggest a council, but maybe with a caveat that touches into the 5th question, a council of men.
Okay.
So okay.
Okay, Francis.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say it was based on the other questions, based on question 2, that it was one man.
Okay.
Or one person, anyway.
Yep.
Was question 2.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point.
It's
Reading
implicit in
I was looking
question 2.
Yes.
That there was one leader.
Dead giveaway.
I tricked you, Francis.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Andrew was right.
Right, okay. And I'm going to go for the second one then, is hereditary, following what Francis just said on 2.
Yeah, but no. So 1 and 2, actually 2 is a non-question because 1 it was a council of men. So I mean, you couldn't have got it better, Andrew.
I got that. Yeah, I was going to make that caveat looking at question 6. What about male and female? So it would have been council of men.
Yeah.
So that also answers 6 then.
You will. Yes. Yeah, we'll get to 6. But that was a fairly obvious thing you could say.
Yeah.
So how are day-to-day decisions made? Like, are you going to go off collecting eggs today or tend the sheep, or what are we going to do each day?
Whose turn is it to answer?
Yours, because I think 1 and 2 are one question, really.
Okay. Well, through the council, I suspect they did something like they set up a rota. That's what I'd guess.
Yeah.
I can tell you that that's not quite right because the weather was so changeable. Each day you have to make a decision what you're going to do.
Depending on the weather.
So did the council make it each day?
Okay, yep, that's good. Good answer, Andrew.
Yeah, I would say the council must have made it every day according to the weather. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is. I think you've got it as good as you're going to. There's this famous thing called the Parliament, the St Kilda Parliament, that intrigued the outside world. And some of those photos of all these men looking at you, that is the St Kilda Parliament. And what they did was all the men just met, and sometimes they talked for hours before they did anything.
Right.
Blimey, so the whole day was gone before
that's right.
they decided what to do.
Yes.
It's men for you, eh?
Yes, and then sometimes they just met and said, right, it's clearly we're doing fishing today, and off they go with decide in 5 minutes. And the outside world found this kind of annoying because by the time the British culture learned about St Kilda and it got more and more in the newspapers and things, we were very Protestant worth ethic, and the idea of just sitting about discussing doing nothing was really not on. But if their aim is just to survive, then if there's nothing that's urgent and they want to talk all day, then why not? What's the problem? It's a sort of clash of cultures that makes it seem distasteful for us that all the men just sat about talking all day and didn't do anything. Question 4: what kinds of things were held in common and what were owned by individuals? So I
sounds
gave
like
you
the Book of Acts kind of question with the church. It's a similar thing.
Yes. Yeah. So I gave you two sort of extremes of where to put the thing. Only boats and things like that were held in common, or only knives and things like that were held by individual families.
Right.
Andrew, it's your turn.
Yeah, I would say, well, I would think, yeah, things that were obviously used by all for these different things that they would do each day, depending on the weather, would be common. And then there would be probably items, small items, individuals that weren't. So, whatever was decided with the sharing things, I suppose, by the council.
Yeah.
I suppose the sheep were probably owned in common.
Yeah. Boats, sheep.
Yes, and then I think it would be down to sort of small household items. The land would have belonged to the laird, and the houses presumably belonged to the laird, so not really owned in common. So I think it would be down to sort of really quite small personal items.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it was right at that end of the scale.
Right.
So loads of stuff was held in common, and just a few things like that were your personal possessions. And I guess it got more and more as time went on and money came in and that sort of thing, that it got more that things were not held in common. Okay. So the distribution of food. So imagine you spent the day harvesting birds from the cliffs. They were called googers, a gannet, just before it could fly away. So gannets are those wonderful big birds you get in these cliffs. In fact, I think like a quarter of the world population of gannets is on St Kilda and the other islands. Anyway, how is it all divided up amongst the families?
Well, I'm going to say it's divided up according to need.
Okay, Andrew, do you agree?
Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very socialist by
amazing. Yeah, I'm going to say this reminds me of the Book of Acts thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was all about everybody surviving and what they needed to do to achieve that. So outsiders sort of describe this as a utopia, this kind of thing. But then male-female roles and equity, I think you've nailed it.
Yeah, there would have been that hierarchy.
I think we've established that.
Yeah. So obviously they were completely unequal. Women had no say in these day-to-day decisions, and they had to work much harder than men when it was all added up. So the typical, the men did the daring do, climbing the cliffs, and the women did all the hard work. So it's sort of as you'd expect.
Yes.
Put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we can talk about religion on the island, and I'm going to split this into two halves, and we'll see how we get on with time. But certainly, let's look at religion before the external influence got going, while they were still pretty well in isolation. So this is up till about 1700. So let's start at the beginning. They were sort of Christian, and it's actually one of the earliest places in Britain to become Christian, because the Celtic monks and missionaries did come to from Ireland to the rest of Britain by sea, and they did the kind of remote islands first. So and then got, like Lindisfarne was only just off the coast. Iona was just off the coast. So it was the remote islands that became Christian first. We can imagine. But then when the very first visitors started turning up, this is, I think, probably the earliest account we have is 1549. And this is, so really what I'm going to say now is based on how things were after these centuries and centuries of isolation. So does anyone want to read this quote I've got, or shall I read it out?
Well, I'm no good at accents. If you want it,
I'm not. Well,
okay. So read it without an accent then.
Yeah.
Who, me?
Okay, great.
The inhabitants thereof are simple, poor people, scarce learned in any religion, meaning any Christian religion.
Yeah, I reckon definitely that's what the person would have meant. So they were sort of formally Christian, but it was hardly recognizable for an outsider. But they did have a chaplain visit occasionally to baptize the children and do marriages and things. But actually, in day-to-day religion, it was as much influenced by what we would call Druidism as it was Christianity.
So kind of like a benign version of the Wicker Man.
I guess so, but there was a sort of, I don't know. Well, you said benign, but I'm not sure how benign, much Wicker Man is left when you've taken off the edge.
Sorry.
Well, it's just what you do. That's how I sense it. It's not like you have any beliefs or practices that you're kind of massively attached to and going to be defending. It's just part of life. It's what you do.
Right.
You have these druidic altars around and stone circles, and some chapels as well. They had a bit of everything, and they believed in spirits, in animals and rock faces and things having spirits. That was just sort of part of life that didn't presumably think about very much. It's just how life was.
Okay, right.
So this Martin visitor, who was like he was like a journalist of his day, visiting the Hebrides. So he visited, as I said, in 1697, and in his party that went with the taxman, there was a minister, and there were 15 weddings, and it was all full of joy and dancing with bagpipes and everything. And he described the island as the happiest people on earth.
Oh.
And he also said they were totally unaware of the 7 deadly sins. Another quote from, actually, I'll say it from him. They were a gay people, fond of song, poetry, and games.
Right.
Yes,
gay in the original sense of the word.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
I should mention in passing that I should have said this before. Maybe I'm basing a lot of this information on a book by a bloke called Tom Steele, and it's called The Life and Death of St Kilda. It was written in 1975, and it's still, I think, amazingly good. It hasn't dated. And when I read it, even though I've grown up with St Kilda and stuff, I just learned such a lot. It's just great.
It does sound fascinating. It does sound, it does sound like it's worth a read.
Yeah, and I don't think it's in print, but it's not difficult to get on Amazon as a second hand.
You think I could get it on my Kilda? Sorry, on my Kindle, on my Kilda, on my Kindle.
On your Kilda, you can if you want to go out there. Francis,
I don't know.
You can take a trip.
I don't know, but certainly you can buy a second-hand copy, unless everybody listens to this all at once goes online. It should be quite easy to get a hold of a copy. So this is a bit of Ed's psychology. I'm not quoting anybody, but based on Maslow and just vaguely what I've heard over the years, there's three things that contribute to happiness. So putting it in Maslow's way with his hierarchy of needs, the basic need is for safety and security for happiness. Next up is a sort of sense of belonging and relationships. And then towards the top, you have purpose and meaning. And for Maslow, and I think I agree, but it's a side point, that as you have your safety and security needs met, then you become aware of your need for belonging in relationships. And then when they're met, you become aware of your need for meaning and purpose in life. But and if you've got all three, then you're going to be happy. That's to me how I see it. And if you're using that framework, then it seems that the St Kildans were really happy, that they, compared to a lot of other places, they did have safety and security provided by the ocean and by all the ways that they had. They had fishing, and if that failed, they had seabirds. If that failed, they had a little bit of agriculture, and then income from barter and stuff from the sheep as well. So that had that. They massively had belonging and relationships. So it was a very close community. And then they did have this big sense of purpose and meaning in just keeping the whole thing going. And that was, that's what mattered to them. So moving on, to me, religion and morality are important, to deal with together, because of often when people say, oh, you're very Christian, they mean that you're very moral. And so let's look at that. So there was that mention of the 7 deadly sins. And really there was very little sin going on. So we take murder as an extreme. Well, that was totally unknown. And as was, as far as we can tell, envy and even drunkenness, they just wasn't happening. And theft wasn't happening. So,
well, there wasn't much to steal, was there? I mean, you can only steal a neighbour's knife and fork.
Yeah.
I suppose with 200 people, it does change the whole thing, doesn't it?
It would,
everyone knows everybody. So it's actually a family, and so really, I suppose the squabbles would be like family squabbles, not the extreme murders, and
Yeah. Well, you can imagine today if there was some reality TV and they scooped up 200 people and plonked them on an island.
Now there's a show for you, St Kilda.
You wouldn't get no drunkenness, no envy, no theft.
Yeah.
And no violence.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be how it was.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that you would. I mean, I think in the reality TV shows.
So sorry, that's what I meant to say. Yeah,
yes, saying that if you
would
do
tend
that,
to get a lot of. In fact, that's what these shows thrive on.
Exactly.
The tensions that arise in this small, closely, intertwined community. So
particularly over women and men in relationships.
Yeah. So if there was, say, a shipwreck and there were some strangers who needed them, they were very hospitable, and and it indeed, utopia is, I think, a good way of talking about it, because I think the original Utopia with Thomas More, he imagined how moral people would be if they, if they were left alone, and that's actually what did happen here and doesn't happen in most other communities. So this is a 1758 visitor called Macaulay, and he said their morals are much purer than those of great and opulent societies, however much civilized. And then he also said to relieve the poor, to entertain the stranger, to leave their doors open to everyone, were heretofore the reigning maxims there. The St. Kildans retain much of this primitive spirit. They are remarkably generous and open-hearted. So we're getting a picture of, what we would call pro-social here in our modern way of describing these things. And Macaulay had to think of something negative to say, and their worst feature was a low sort of cunning and a trick of lying, and a violent passion for tobacco. So if that's the worst you can think of somebody, then of a community, then
yeah,
that's pretty good. and this cunning and trick of lying, it could be, a cultural thing. I don't think that's necessarily a kind of mean thing, but maybe I'm being overly.
But I mean, it's a bit difficult without more details, without knowing examples. I mean, what were they lying about? Was it like fisherman's tales type lying, or was it?
No, I think they were trying to get one over visitors over something, but it could be like protecting themselves.
Perhaps it was about the tobacco.
Yes.
Or how many people there were on the island.
Yes.
There's a lot more of us,
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's quite interesting. Join the dots. So 1758. So that's what, 200 years after tobacco was the thing.
Yeah.
It had got there. So we could say that the end of this big period of isolation for centuries and centuries. It was only then that external influences from the mainland sort of became more of a thing, with people sending missionaries and stuff. So I think it's a good time to sort of stop and reflect, and if we have this theme of religion in isolation, what are we learning here?
Well, I mean, it's go on, Francis.
No, I don't know that I had much to say beyond what I'd suggested earlier, that it was perhaps going to be shaped like the mice and the wren to what was needed in this very isolated community, and was perhaps going to be quite different from the way it had shaped in large communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's sort of having the ring of, just like everything on the positive side of everything with the island, without the outside influence, it can seem to be, in this case, like a utopian feeling. And when the outside world comes in, that's when things start to go bad, not necessarily better. In a little way, a bit like when the rats came. You've got this sort of, it's a metaphor for human stuff coming in, can then start to change things and mess up the way of life that was going fairly well in many ways. So it seems to be that sort of thing, rather than they've all gone sort of like cannibals or something like that, and suddenly somebody comes out and rescues them from the disaster of what's going on. It seems to be the other way around, that it's looking like. So in this,
to me, it's almost like an absence of religion. That when we think of religion, certainly today, we think of beliefs that people are subscribing to and are almost willing to die for. in like different versions of Christianity in the Reformation era and the decades after. People were, it was violent, and it really mattered to people, and they were happy to be tortured and burnt at the stake for the sake of their beliefs. That kind of religion just was completely absent. I don't think they even noticed that they, that they were believing things. And there was a sort of some kind of framework of Christianity, and they probably didn't realize that when they were doing their druidic circles that was somehow heresy and that sort of thing. That just was not a thing in any way at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then again, when it is this small community and there's no kind of neighboring tribe to be warlike over because there's just ocean, this lovely pro-social stuff seemed to just grow up, to me, not because they were brilliant people, but because that's the environment that generated this lovely pro-social atmosphere they had.
There's an analogy here to the to that island, or the different islands. I'm not sure where they come from. Those particular turtles that are giant and they move very slowly. Like, it takes a good 20 minutes just to get across a room length distance, and their heads aren't fully in because they've evolved in a way that they don't really need to go fully in. And apparently it's because they didn't have the competition of predator over millions of years or thousands of, or whatever the distance was in time. And so they didn't need to run, they didn't need to develop to hide their heads and use their shells like tortoises and other sort of creatures do in that way with the protection. And I remember talking to the guy at the zoo about this, and I was saying, God, it's fascinating. They don't go, it looks a bit like they're not, why doesn't the head go fully in? Is they didn't need to, and they didn't need to run away. And this is a similar analogy to here, isn't it? It's like you're seeing evolution in action with a community without the warfare from another community that's battling them, and coming over in boats and doing everything. They sort of evolve in a more perhaps peaceful and tranquil way of harmony, potentially, particularly if some people said this is like a utopia and full of happiness. Wow. How different from the Western world.
Yes. I love to get my head around this and think, look, this is just a completely different way of being a human to us. We have our kind of, what are they called, nuclear families, and our identity is in our family. And when we go to Waitrose or wherever you go in shopping, maybe you might meet people but basically you're not interacting with people that you are connected to. And for them, every relationship they had a deep connection to, they've known all their lives, and their families and everything were all interconnected and their common purpose, they all have the same purpose of the survival of the community. Just who you were was not, I'm Ed and that's me, and I sort of see myself as a self-contained unit. I don't think they would have done that. They would have seen themselves as part of the community as much as, if not more than as in themselves as an individual.
That's very Jewish, by the way, that kind of concept.
The
Jewish communities would probably express themselves like that. The oneness is in the group, not the person. Identity is found in the group. Interesting. Well, we get signs of that even now with our own communities, I suppose, but then you're always battling the stranger and the outside, and the I've known of places like, for example, locking doors. I bet you it depends what their places were. I'm not sure how much of house they actually building wise had there, but just say it was a place that was lockable. I imagine that no one would lock the doors.
That's right. They didn't.
Wouldn't need to. No one just a bit like you probably don't in someone's house. A family, generally speaking, sometimes do,
you wouldn't lock doors within the house against.
You don't tend to go into the house and lock every door you go in case the sister comes down and takes your stuff. It just doesn't work like that, generally speaking. And so it's interesting, isn't it? So a community would be the same, and therefore, so theft, it doesn't quite come up to what we think of now as when we have to bolt the door several times before we go out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, interesting. So
this is my suggestion to stop here.
Yep.
And we're giving hints of a cloud on the horizon.
It's going to be fascinating stuff to see.
So this is when the isolation finished and people on the mainland took an interest in their souls.
Yes,
I think that's that's a good break point, because it'd be interesting to go into that. What sounds like a really horrific experience they had with religion from after that point, to go into that in some detail. And I don't think we're going to be able to do it justice in just over half an hour.
And the idea that religion is put or Christianity is put in ways to redeem the community, make it whole, make it ultimately, in their view, happier and together and sorting out all the problems, is probably not where this is going. So there we go. So it's we're leaving people on a cliff edge, no pun intended here, with the
well, at least they can harvest some seagull eggs.
Yes, that's right. That's right, indeed.
Yeah, and look at the Atlantic storm that you can see rolling in.
And definitely go and look up St Kilda, Scotland, on the Outer Hebrides there, and look at some of these photographs. It almost looks in many ways paradisical, if not a little scary from other angles. So it's both. That probably metaphor for the whole place anyway, isn't it? It's got this paradise side and a bit of scary side to it. In its stories.
And do find this Tom Steele book, which will be in the show notes, because there's heaps in there that I'm not going near. He talks about religion, but he talks about most of the books not about religion.
I think it's a great place to pause and wait to see how religion and isolation come together, and be a fascinating tale to find out this interaction and really make you think, won't it, in this religious aspect. So until next time, and we carry on with this story in more religious aspect, much more in detail. I've been Andrew, your host.
And I've been Frances.
And I've been Ed from St Kilda.
Okay, bye.